Hello, I'm Judy Richards, and I'd like to welcome Shemia, Fagan, Democratic candidate for Secretary of State.
Hi, Judy. I'm happy to be here.
What has motivated you to run for Secretary of State?
Judy, I've been an Oregonian my whole life, and I've never voted any other way than vote by mail, which up until recently is about the most boring topic in Oregon politics. But unfortunately, right now, more than ever, Oregon's really groundbreaking vote by mail system is under attack like never before. And I think Oregonians deserve a Secretary of State who will stand up to attacks on the Oregon way of democracy. I'm such a strong believer in democracy. As a member, I've been on the school board. I was a member of the Oregon House, and I'm currently a member of the Oregon State Senate, because democracy, when it really works, is really the best hope for kids like me. I grew up in Eastern Oregon. I'm a rural Oregon kid. Doofer and the Dalles are where I grew up. My dad was a single parent, raising 3 kids by himself, having a hard time making ends meet. My mom battled meth and opioid addiction and homelessness for most of my life. I remember visiting her once when I was in high school, and she was living under somebody else's porch on a sleeping bag to cover the dirt floor. But I also know that because of a wonderful state like Oregon and the services that Oregon provides, when my mom passed away in October of 2014, she'd been clean for almost 6 years and was living in the first house she ever owned out in Umatilla, Oregon. So I also know that democracy is the place where your circumstances in your future are not determined by the circumstances of your present, that you can make a change in your life, and particularly in a place like Oregon. And so I have spent my career as a civil rights attorney, as an Oregon legislator, and now running for Secretary of State, fighting to break down barriers, things like automatic voter registration, and most recently expanding vote by mail with prepaid postage. And so I just think right now Oregon deserves a Secretary of State who will stand up for our way of life, who will make sure that our scarce resources actually go to make an impact in the lives of people who need them the most.
Thank you. Oregon seniors and people with disabilities are experiencing fear and anxiety in today's uncertain environment. What is your plan to ensure that all state departments are communicating and sharing accurate, up-to-date information about COVID-19?
Well, first, I just want to say that I understand why people, seniors and Oregonians with disabilities and their families and loved ones are really concerned right now, because this is a really scary time, particularly for anybody that feels especially vulnerable to this pandemic or to the secondary effects of this pandemic: job losses, housing insecurity, and lack of health coverage. And so it is something that I really understand. This is a place where the Oregonian or the Secretary of State's audits function really comes into effect. The Oregon Secretary of State is the director of the audits division, and the Secretary of State works with the director of that division to identify the biggest risks facing Oregonians, and to then have independent, non-biased auditors do the work to find out what can we do better, how can we make sure that our scarce state resources actually make it into the programs and into the hands of people so it will make a real difference in real lives. And I am looking forward to being that for Oregon's seniors and people with disability.
Well, describe how you're going to promote more opportunities for seniors and people with disabilities to open and maintain their businesses.
Well, as you alluded to, the Secretary of State also oversees the corporate division. And I think in particularly we need to make sure that it's a place where Main Street businesses can start and can thrive. And that's why the very first bill that I ever authored in the Oregon House as a freshman baby legislator was to create the Office of Small Business Assistance in the Secretary of State's office, which I'm happy to say is a nationally renowned model. But that is an office that is particularly important right now, as large corporations, they've got their in-house teams, they know what they're doing. It is Oregon's small businesses, our Main Street businesses, our solo entrepreneurs that really need to have that assistance. And so I will make sure that that office that I helped create as a freshman legislator is fully staffed and thriving during this time, so that Oregonians' help as a small business owner is literally one phone call away from the Secretary of State's office.
Well, how are you going to increase voting and a voice among seniors and people with disabilities, especially those with additional barriers such as people of color and those who live in residential facilities, or homebound who have special needs?
Well, first off, I will defend Oregon's groundbreaking vote by mail system, which right now we are seeing across the country how well we have it here in Oregon, that folks that are in a residential facility, folks with mobility issues, don't even have to request an absentee ballot. That ballot comes to them automatically by virtue of being registered voters here in Oregon. And again, registration is automatic when folks interact with the Department of Motor Vehicles. We need to expand our automatic voter registration. Particularly, I can think of seniors and people with disabilities. There might be circumstances in which they don't get a driver's license. Therefore, they don't interact with the Department of Motor Vehicles. What other places are they interacting with state government so we can make sure that they are automatically registered to vote? But there are a lot of specific things that we can do in our voting system to even improve the wonderful voting, the secure, accessible, safe voting system we have here in Oregon. And one of those is allow somebody with a physical disability that prevents them from signing to actually have a power of attorney sign like they do in Arizona. I know this because an attorney who I hired a few years ago, who is a brilliant attorney, and she's 100% paralyzed from her shoulders down from a car accident when she was a teenager. She said when she lived in Arizona, her mom, who's her power of attorney, could sign her ballot for her. But in Oregon, she has to affix her signature with a thumbprint. And with somebody with a limp wrist that doesn't often twist in the right direction, getting an actual thumbprint for her ballot is really difficult. It makes sure they have to have an ink pad at home every voting cycle. And she said it takes her multiple tries to not have her fingerprint be a blob. So there are specific ways that we can make sure that everybody in Oregon has low barriers to make sure they participate in our wonderful democracy here in Oregon.
If elected, what will you do as Secretary of State to ensure that we have transparency and accountability in Oregon's government, specifically in areas that impact seniors and people with disabilities?
This is a place where I think it's important when we talk about transparency, we also talk about accessibility. For example, right now there's a website that I think was a good idea by one of our former Secretary of State, Dennis Richardson, where it's a whole bunch of state data about state spending, and it's on a website. And that's great. But as a young person, I'm only 38, who's actually quite tech savvy, I find it very difficult to navigate and find the information that I need. And I think even more so for folks that might not be my same age and as familiar with computers and technology as I am, or folks with any kind of learning or cognitive disabilities. This information not just to be transparent, but in an accessible format so that people that want to get this information have a user-friendly interface. OrStar, for example, which is our transparent campaign finance system here in Oregon, which I'm very supportive that we have a transparent campaign finance system that shows where contributions flow to and from candidates and organizations, but it needs to be user-friendly. It needs to be something that someone doesn't have to have a computer science degree or years of experience working with it. So I think that we need to upgrade our technology to make sure that it's not just transparent, but also accessible. So it's marrying the archives division with the audits division. The audits division gives that independent, non-biased information. Then we also need to modernize the actual format in which we put that information out. So the folks, my grandparents and my parents don't have to be calling me to try and help them access that information. So I don't have to go and call my middle school niece to be able to navigate computers.
Yes. Thank you. We've been visiting today with Shemia Fagan, Democratic candidate for Secretary of State.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here with you, and I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with your folks.
Yes, and I thank you for joining us today as we went through this interview. It was a pleasure visiting with Shemia Fagan, Democratic candidate for Secretary of State.